Psalm 133. How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down upon the collar of his robes. How good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters live together in harmony, in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard. On whose beard? On Aaron's beard, the high priest's beard, the one who stands in between us and God. It's like this abundant, precious oil poured on his head, dripping down on his beard, even onto his robes, onto his garments. How good it is. What a blessing it is when brothers and sisters live together in harmony. It's like this oil being poured upon us. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to everybody watching in Westside. If you're in Kitchener, in Chatham, my name's Pete, and you're joining us in this series that we were calling A Whole New World, where we're walking through the early chapters in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible. And we're looking at how this book creates a whole new worldview for us. It changes the way that we see ourselves and God. It changes the way that we read the Bible because it introduces these core themes that then repeat and then get developed throughout the rest of the Bible. And so if you've been with us, today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 4, but just a little bit of a reminder, if you're like, what have we been talking about? Maybe this image will kind of remind you of some of the places we've been. This is from 2 weeks ago. We have this idyllic garden space. And a man and a woman are placed there, and the idea is that they would have a vocation to continue to order and to create and to rule over the garden, and then to extend the garden and its beauty and its order throughout the rest of the world. And they're told that they have permission to eat from any tree, and yet there's one prohibition, but not from this tree. And then they have this wonderful relationship with one another and with God, and they were naked, and they felt no shame. And last week, we looked at how this idyllic beginning all crumbles. It all dissolves when the man and woman decide not to trust God. They choose to grasp outside of his boundaries. They disobey, they rebel, and God banishes them from the garden. And that's where we are as we begin chapter 4 today, is outside of the garden. How far outside? Well, there's one little detail that we'll read later that it seems as though we could imagine it as they are just right outside. Like God banished them and they didn't like run away. They're just like, okay, what do we do now? I guess we'll camp here until maybe God will let us back in. I don't know. But in Genesis chapter 4, we're about to walk through today, we're outside of the garden. Now, just before we read it, though, I want to ask you if you've noticed something as we've been going through the early chapters here. And you've noticed this maybe if you're a person who reads your Bible regularly. Do you ever notice that the Bible seems to be able to like tap into the experience in a unique way? It's like, how do these stories about farmers and brothers and sisters and kings and how do these stories know so much about what it's like to be human? It's like Genesis, have you been reading my diary? Like, how do you know so much about us? Sometimes reading these stories, it's like looking in the mirror. And it's like these stories make us look at ourselves, and these stories have questions for us. And so today as we walk through the story, I want to, in my own mind anyways, keep it pretty simple and allow this story to question you, to be like looking into a mirror and to see what it might evoke and what it kind of pulls out of you. So here we go. Genesis chapter 4, we're outside of the garden. Now the man was intimate with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and she gave birth to Cain. And then she said, I have created a man just as the Lord did. Interesting, that phrasing. You can find different interpretations of this depending on which Bible you're reading, but this one I think is the most faithful. And it has this air of autonomy. It has this, look what I can do. It has the figure from just the chapter before who decided, maybe I won't trust God. Maybe I can be like God. That same character now says, look at me. I can make humans just like God did. There's a little bit of like the rebellion continues. The questioning of, do I really even need God? We're outside the garden here, but look at us. Start pumping out babies all over the place. Look, I have made a man just as the Lord did. And then she gave birth to his brother, Abel. Abel is the Hebrew word havel, which is the word for like vapor or mist, something that is here in a moment and then suddenly gone. Here in a moment and suddenly gone. I wonder if this character will stick around for very long. Oh, you know this story. Abel took care of the flocks while Cain cultivated the ground. Abel was a shepherd. His brother Cain, his older brother Cain, was a farmer. Now, a little bit of the people that would have first heard this story and how these characters develop throughout the rest of the biblical narrative. Farmers are usually connected to cities, and cities are usually connected to some types of evil. Like you get a whole bunch of humans together, like a couple humans on their own, usually up to no good. You get a whole bunch of them together, what's going to happen? Really no good. And farming had this sort of like connection to slave labor as well. So when you read that there is a farmer, you would be a little bit like, this could be the character that has some trouble in this story. And then there's another character, and what's he? He's a shepherd? Ooh, shepherds. Shepherds. We hear about shepherds all throughout the rest of the Bible. God seems to like to go to the shepherds. He likes to speak to the outsiders. God will refer to himself as a shepherd. So we have a shepherd and a farmer, and already in the minds of the first listeners, readers of this story, they're thinking, I can see a division. A shepherd and a farmer. Those are different things in the biblical imagination. And then at the designated time, Cain brought some of the fruit of the ground for an offering to the Lord. Interesting, at the designated time. What's that designated time? I don't know. The story doesn't tell you. The story just wants you to know, there was a designated time they would make offerings, and it has this whole religious system apparently exists, even though we've heard no mention of it up until this point in the Bible. Important lesson to not ask questions that the text isn't asking. If the text just tells you something, you don't always have to read and uncover all those things. You just go, okay, I guess there's a designated time. There's some sort of ritual already established. And when that time came, Cain, he brought some of the fruit of the ground for an offering to the Lord. And then it's almost like, remember last week when it was like Eve, or the woman character, she's talking to the serpent, and then suddenly it's like, and the man was there too. Remember that? It was like, poof, suddenly he's there also. We kind of have this Cain brings an offering, and then also Abel. But Abel brought some of the firstborn of his flock, even the fattest of them. So two brothers make two separate offerings. And the Lord was pleased with Abel and his offering, but with Cain and his offering, he was not pleased. And so Cain became very angry, and his expression was downcast. God is pleased with one and not pleased with the other, and the other, being Cain, becomes angry and downcast. We should be asking a lot of questions as we're reading this story because there's not a lot of details here. Why was God pleased with one and not the other? It doesn't say. Why is Cain angry? Who's he angry at? He's just, angry at God, angry at his brother, just angry in general, downcast, like depressed. What's going on in this story? In the New Testament, when the New Testament writers look back and interpret this story, they'll interpret it as Abel's offering was better. And so that's what's happening here. Abel brings a better offering. Cain's is not as good. They'll interpret Cain as like an evil figure, like he has some messed up desires in his heart, and so his offering didn't come from a pure place. They'll read that into the story, and because they have their own points that they want to make. But in the story as it is, those things are not very clear. You'd have to do a lot of work to read those in. Now maybe there is one detail that Abel brings, like the firstborn, and he brings the fattest of them. It's like Abel brings the best, and Cain just brings some of his fruits, the fruits of his labor. So maybe that's the distinction there, but it's still not super clear. Maybe what's happening here is what we see happen throughout the whole Bible, which is the God who is free to choose. The God who often picks the younger brother. The God who looks with favor upon some and not the same favor of others. Maybe we're supposed to read this not as like a rejection of Cain, but simply God looks upon Abel with favor. And then Cain's like, what about me? And God's like, what about, why are you so angry? Like, you're just angry just because I look. Like, there's not a rejection of Cain here. And in fact, if you were to look at a strict, more literal interpretation of this idea of the Lord was pleased, it's actually this idea that the Lord gazed upon. The Lord gazed upon Abel, and he did not gaze upon Cain. He gazed upon Abel, and he did not gaze upon Cain. And Cain becomes angry and downcast. You know what I think is happening here is that we have a new complexity that has entered into the narrative. In chapter 3, the trouble was between the humans and God. God had one rule for the humans, and the humans mess up. You're like, oh, man, we can't even follow one rule. Man, good thing life's not going to get more complex than that. Oh, it's going to get more complex. How? Brothers are going to show up. Sisters are going to show up. You're going to have parents, and you're going to have kids. Complexity is on its way. And in this story, we have that first complexity, the complexity of the brother. The complexity of the other. Anybody been around kids before? You know the way kids are, like they're very attuned, especially if you're their parents or someone that they really look up to. They're very attuned to, do you like me? Do you like me the best? Am I your best friend? Am I your best kid? Am I your favorite kid? Do you gaze upon me the way that you gaze upon my siblings? Is there something special about me? You know this. We had this happen in our house just yesterday. On Saturdays, our kids have lots of different events that they do. And yesterday, some of our kids decided, we're sick, we don't want to do the things that we signed up to do. And we're like, sure, we'll see. So we let them not do their thing. And then hours later, they felt good. Oh, miracle healing, excellent. But one of our kids decided, I don't feel the best, but I'm going to go because I signed up to do this, and I'm going to go and I'm going to do the thing. And when they came back, my wife and I, we're like, way to go. Like, way to go that you went. We're so proud of you that you went and you kept your word that you do this thing. And it was like we were gazing upon one of our children. What do you think the other children suddenly felt? Why are you making us feel so bad? Why don't you love us? Do you want us to just should we pack our things and leave? Like, it was just the most dramatic. Oh my, you would think we were beating them. You would think it was just like, we're so, they feed one of us dinner and the rest of us starve. Like, kids are very attuned to the gazing upon. And we are very attuned to this as well, aren't we? Do you know the feelings of jealousy and envy? You look at other people's lives and you're evaluating. Have they gotten like to start off further ahead than me? Is God blessing them more than he's blessing me? Do they have some sort of like unfair advantage ahead of me? Do you know the feeling of like, I started a business and somebody else started like the same business and they're succeeding and I'm going bankrupt? Do you know the feeling of like some people they're just strolling through life? And it's like, oh, it's time to start dating, and they start dating, and dating's a great experience for them. And then they find their spouse, and then they have kids, and it's like, oh, we could make a TV show about your life. It's so wonderful. And you're over here like, how does everything work out for you? Where does this blessing come from? Why is it like God is gazing upon you, and he's not gazing upon me? I think that what we're seeing in this story is the introduction of the complexities of other people. It was hard enough just to deal with God. Now you got to deal with God and other people. And Cain experiences very quickly, I'm just angry now. I'm angry at God for gazing upon my brother and not upon me. I'm angry at my brother. Why did he show up? And I was doing the offering. Now he's making the offering his thing. And then he gets the look of God. I think we all know this feeling. And in fact, the back half of Genesis, it's 50 chapters, the back 25 chapters of Genesis is all about brothers. Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. The complexities of family life and family strife have been introduced in this story. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your expression downcast? I love this for the implicit thing that has just happened here. Remember, chapter 3, God has said, if you eat from this one tree, you will surely die. And then the humans eat from it. And then they don't die. And then God banishes them from the garden. And you could imagine a world where there's a God who banishes these disobedient, rebellious humans from the garden. And then he sits in the garden and he goes, hope you're doing fine out there, eh? Yeah, I bet you really regret your decisions. Oh, is it cold out there? Oh yeah, better make a tent. Better start planting some crops. Like you could imagine a God who says, no, I have banished you and now you're out there and I'm in here. But instead in this story, we have a God who suddenly now is outside of the garden. He decides to leave the garden to go and be with Cain in his anger. He goes to the angry older brother. Jesus would tell a story about brothers. And in that story, there would end up being an angry older brother. And what does the God character do, the father character do in that story? He goes out to the angry older brother. We have a God all throughout Scripture who comes to us when we are angry and downcast. When we are on the outside, God leaves his high place to descend and come to us. Why is it that you're so angry? Why is your expression downcast? And then this verse, which has so much packed into it. Is it not true that if you do what is right, that you'll be uplifted? You're downcast. If you do what's right, you'll be uplifted. But if you do not do what is right, then sin is crouching at the door. Sin is like an animal type creature here. Sin is personified as like it's crouching. It's waiting to get you, Cain. You're angry right now? Well, you can be angry. Jesus was angry. You can be angry. Anger by itself is not wrong, but anger can lead you to do some bad things. Anger can lead you to do some good things, but it can also lead you into this trap. And it's crouching where? It's crouching at the door. A lot of commentators talk about the door. Sometimes we culturally have the image of like the door of your heart. It's crouching at the door of your heart. And that's not a bad, like that works. That'll work for this idea. But maybe what the author is intending here for the door is the door back into the garden. It's the only door that we've seen so far in the stories that we've been looking at. So maybe sin is crouching where? At the door, at the place where you brought your offerings before God, at the door into the garden, the place where the strife between you and your brother exists. Sin is crouching there, waiting for you. What does it want to do? It desires to dominate you, but you must subdue it. When the humans are given their vocation, their role in the early chapters of Genesis, they're told to fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over all of the creatures of the water and the sky and the land. Subdue and rule. That's who you are. That's what I made you to do. And in this moment, God says, Cain, this thing that is crouching at your door, its desires to dominate you. It's this flipping of their identity and their purpose. That the very thing, like the idea of sin being an animal, they were supposed to rule over the animals, and now we have something that looks like an animal that wants to rule over you. And if you let it dominate you, you will have your identity and your purpose robbed from you. There's so much packed into this verse. A couple questions I want to ask from it. One is, so what do you do then when you get angry? What do you do with your anger? I wanted to keep this sermon as simple as possible, and so I didn't want to go reach for, the psychological answers of like, what is the best counseling practice to say about how to deal with your anger? That can all be good and helpful, but I think that there's some really simple things in this story that we should face. One of them is this: when you're angry, do you slow down enough to talk to God? In this story, God comes to Cain and he says to him, "Why are you so angry?" When you get angry with somebody, do you slow down and talk to God and allow him to ask that question, why is it that you're so angry? And then could you imagine yourself just kind of sitting with God and allowing God to help you go through your emotions? Yeah, why am I so angry? Why do I feel this way? Should I feel angry? Did they really hurt me? Or does something else, some other type of envy, jealousy thing, maybe this thing I'm angry about isn't actually the thing, it's actually something underneath this? Do you slow down enough and talk to God and invite God, God, help me to see what's true and help me to see what's false? Do you slow down and allow God to help you go through your emotions? What do you do when you're angry? This verse seems to have the idea that you must subdue this sin that is crouching at your door, this anger that's trying to dominate you. You must. Some people have read this as both a command and a promise that you can rule over this thing. This thing that wants to invite you in and dominate you and pull you away from your identity and purpose, you can rule over this thing. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, would evoke memories of this story of Cain and Abel when he begins to teach about anger. If you were to look it up later today in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus teaches about anger. And if you were to call to mind the story of Cain and Abel, as you read it, you'll realize Jesus clearly has this story in mind. He says, you've heard it said not to murder. Everybody knows that, though. Has there ever been a culture where murder was yeah, what a wonderful thing when we murder? No culture can exist with murder. So you've heard it said not to murder, but I'm saying to you, beware of anger. Beware of calling your brother or sister names. Beware of devaluing them, saying that they're worthless, saying that they're foolish. Beware of that. And if you find that this anger begins to stir up in your heart, Jesus says something very clearly. He says, immediately go and be reconciled with them. And the way that he frames it is he says, if you find yourself at the altar, oh, I know a story about an altar. I know a story about an angry brother who's at an altar. If you find yourself going to the altar and you remember somebody's angry with me, there's division, there's strife in some of my relationships, go and leave your gift there and go and be reconciled to them. And if you don't do this, if you don't have this desire to be reconciled, to fix this, to bring peace, well, then you better watch out, because that sin that's crouching at your door, it's going to pull you in. And you're going to find that it captures you in a certain way. Now, I know that anytime we talk about forgiveness and we talk about reconciliation, it's complex. If we're talking about it in marriage, if we're talking about it in abusive relationships, if we're talking about it when there's things that are just repetitive over year after year, there is complexities to that. And that's why we have a community here. That's why we walk with one another. So hopefully if you have those reconciling sounds dangerous for me. Hopefully you have other people in your life that you can talk to and help walk you through what would be wise. But Jesus' point, he makes it so clear that your heart should be for reconciliation, even if that would be impossible. Your heart should be to forgive, to extend forgiveness, even though it's they so don't deserve it. And I bet they're gonna just keep doing it over and over. Jesus is yeah, but that thing, that anger, if you let it sit there, it's going to dominate you. It's going to rule over you. Jesus shows us what it looks like to rule over, and he says, immediately go and desire reconciliation. The second question from this is, how are you doing with the sin that is crouching at your door? To expand beyond just the anger that we feel sometimes with other humans, we all have things that are crouching at our door. You know what I mean? We all have that little, the proverbial angel and devil on our shoulder, and it's hey, what do you want? Would you like to do this? Would you like to participate in this? Would you like to go through this thought pattern again? Would you like to go through these actions again? We all have that sin that is come on, it'll be good. It's gonna be good. Come on. And it's we're following something that we think is gonna be good, and then as soon as we get in the door, it pounces on us. And it brings shame and guilt again. Do you have that? Do you have that? How are you doing with the shame, with the sin that is crouching at your door? Maybe it's thoughts of laziness. I don't really need to work that hard. Nobody's really paying that close attention. Just another couple hours on the couch, another night on the couch. Maybe it's laziness. That is the sin that is crouching at your door. Maybe it's food. Yeah, just eat. Why not? You know what's funny about food? Nobody really polices each other about food, right? It's so don't say anything about what people are eating, especially if you're married. Never. But food has this interesting power to it. Is that a thing that has dominated you? Whenever thoughts of food, whatever food, I just eat it. I don't have any control. It's just completely dominating me. Maybe it's lust. Maybe it's the different screens that you find yourself on, and the images that sometimes show up, and There's the option to click further and further and further. Or there's the option to just throw your phone out the window. And that sin, it seems that the more that you've lived, the more that it feels like I can't get out of this. This thing just owns me. It's like it's crouching there, and time after time it dominates me over and over again. The sin that's crouching at your door, are you ruling over it? Or is it ruling over you? Cain stews in his anger, and eventually Cain says to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel, and he killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother Abel? And he replied, I don't know. Am I my brother's guardian? But the Lord said, what have you done? Echoes here of Genesis chapter 3. Hey, where are you? What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. So now you are banished from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And when you try to cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its best for you. You will be a homeless wanderer on the earth. Then Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to endure. Look, you're driving me off the land today, and I must hide from your presence. I will be a homeless wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me is going to kill me. This is too much. I can't bear the consequences. I can't bear this justice that you're bringing to my actions. I can't bear it. And what's worse is that whenever someone else finds me, they're going to kill me. How do you expect me to live like this, God? And the Lord said to him, all right then. If anyone kills Cain, then Cain will be avenged 7 times as much. And then the Lord put a special mark on Cain so that no one who found him would strike him down. And so Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain kills his brother. And God's response is a response that we see over and over throughout the Bible. It becomes a pattern throughout the Bible. God's response is justice. Cain, your life is going to be very hard from here on in. There will be dire consequences to what you have done. And yet when Cain cries out, this is too much for me to endure, God extends some mercy. Justice and mercy. We'll see this repeated throughout the pages of Scripture over and over, that God is a God of justice and mercy. And it says that he'll put a mark on Cain. He'll give him a sign of some sort. And the commentators disagree on what was this sign? How did it work? They say that the interpreters won't say that they put a sign on him because then people would think he was wearing a big sign. It wasn't like a big sign, but somehow people would know what he had done. But also he would have a mark on him. He'd have a sign somehow on him that would remind him of what he had done. It would be a reminder of God's justice. And at the same time, I'm still breathing. And so I guess there's some mercy there too. There would be a sign to Cain of God's justice and his mercy. This idea that when God encounters human evil in the Bible, his response is often justice and mercy will get repeated over and over. We saw it in the last chapter. The humans rebel, and God's justice says you gotta go, you're banished. And God's mercy says, here, let me skin some animals and make you some coats. Then we get this story of Cain, who is given consequences, but at the same time given a mark to protect him. In a few weeks, we'll talk about the sign that is given after the flood, the sign of the rainbow, a sign of God's justice and his mercy. In the next book of the Bible, the book of Exodus, we'll see that there are people in slavery. And in order to free those people, God will send plagues upon the nation that has them in captivity. And these signs are a sign of God's justice and his mercy to his people that he will rescue them. Justice and mercy back and forth. This is who this God reveals himself to be. This story is so simple. And yet, like I said at the beginning this morning, there's so much for us to ponder about it. So much about this story to have it look us in the face and ask us questions about how are you doing with your anger? How are you doing with the sin that is crouching at your door. And so for anyone who has experienced the fracture of human relationships, and maybe right now you are angry at somebody, and you've got relationships in your life where you're like, I just can't imagine reconciling with these people. And for anybody who is failing at ruling over the sin that is crouching at your door, there are things that are clearly ruling over you, and you hear the story and you're like, I'm just like Cain. I'm so trapped. And for anybody, because they are trapped and there are things ruling over them, for anybody who would resonate deeply with Cain's words, I cannot endure the consequences of what I have done. For anybody who knows the feeling of losing a marriage because of what you've done, of losing relationships with your kids because of what you've done, of having your entire financial future changed because of your addictions to how you spend money. To anybody who has felt these things, God gives us a new sign with the same meaning in the person of Jesus. Jesus will come and he will take our sins upon himself. He'll take the consequences for our bad decisions, for our rebellion. He'll take all of that upon himself on the cross. He will take God's justice upon himself at the cross. And he will give to us God's mercy. And so in Jesus, and in the central symbol of Christianity throughout the ages, we find justice and mercy. Except for in the cross, God says, I'll take the justice and you get the mercy. And when you experience this mercy, it will have you, as hard as it is to do, want to extend that mercy to other people. It will have you have a deep desire in your heart to reconcile with people, even when they hurt you. God, would you search our hearts and search our minds and have this story engage us and question us? And if we need a fresh touch from you to be reminded of your love and mercy over our lives, if we feel like there are things that we cannot endure and we need to know that you are gazing upon us, then let the people come and experience your love and your presence and your forgiveness. And if we need strength today, we need strength because the complexities of the other, of our brother, of our mother and father, of our kids, of our neighbors, of our coworkers, it's so hard. It's so hard to want to love them, God, and we need your strength to do that. If we need that blessing, then let the people come. Jesus, would you be here by the power of your Spirit in this room? In your name we pray. Amen.